Over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Chari, and thanks for this opportunity. Global experience is in fact very similar to what we've been describing so far. The same sort of barriers to access, the same sort of challenges for households, the same challenges to institutions. Where do they get the money from? How do they account for connection fees? The textbooks from World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, make quite clear, although you can see some interesting formulae there, they say very clearly that connection subsidies are less distorting than consumption subsidies. So better to really subsidize getting people connected if we are short of funds, rather than ongoing subsidizing operating expenditure. Very clear messages there. Looking just, for example, from one utility in England, what are the sort of costs involved and how do they build up? This particular utility now has application fees, connection charges for actually doing the pipe work and putting a ferrule on the main, infrastructure charges, which is their way of charging for each new connection part of the fixed asset base to be built up to the right level in order to deliver water to these new connections. And then a new one on me, income offset allowance, recognizing that because this new connection is going to bring in a lot of revenue for the water company over the years, they can offset it in some way. Also making allowance for water efficiency. The connection fee is going down, the more efficient you can make the units and water consuming entities in the household. And so this particular one, we can see this total example here. On the right-hand side, the water efficient fixtures, you have a 90% reduction.
The slides are not moving.
Richard, your slides are not.
Not at all.
No.
That's disappointing. I like my slides.
No, we can run it if you're okay with it.
Is it? Can you see anything now?
No, nothing's moving. Sayan, do you have a copy of the PPT?
Yes, ma'am.
He has an old copy.
Oh,
but it's unusual not to.
Maybe you could just close and try one more time, Richard.
Okay. Yes. I was enjoying seeing it from my end.
So with technology, when we don't know what to do, we just close and restart.
I understand. I think maybe, what's this one? Anything at all? What can you see at the moment?
Yeah, perfect.
Is it working?
Yes.
Yes, you can go back.
So I was showing this complicated diagram of a conventional water utility building up the various costs between application fees, connection charges, infrastructure charges, and this new thing called offset allowance, and also allowance for having water efficient baths and showers and WCs within any house. And showing here, hoping it is still working in yellow, you can see that the water infrastructure charge, which is the charge to get the fixed assets to the right level, has dropped by 90% because developers and house builders showing they are using water efficient fittings. And then this income offset allowance, very strange thing, but saying the utility is making business out of this connection, it should make some allowance for that business. On this particular one, $1,000 per connection offset allowance. And part of the reason for showing this is everybody changes official connection fees to suit whatever policy is most important. It doesn't matter how you do it, but the policy has to be there and you adjust the connection charge accordingly. In my country, I've put in here, converted it through purchasing power parity to rupees to give you a sense of the different connection charges overall before some of those reductions. Very much depend upon the type of road or footway it is in. These things do make a difference to the water company, but they will have to learn to overcome it. And so in this context, with Chari, we did a study some years ago saying charging to enter the water shop, question mark. Do we get charged to enter the supermarket? No, they make their money for fixed assets offers by a very small amount on everything we buy. Why do we charge people to enter the water shop? But we did find in that study this average $300 connection fee, which is utterly unaffordable to $1 a day households. Within that, the Friends in National Water Uganda recognized there was a challenge there, and they put a surcharge of 10% on the overall water tariff, and then said there will be free connections to households within a distance of 50 meters, apart from the cost of the actual meter itself. When they started, they were only doing 1,200 connections a month. When they changed it at that time, doing 2,000 per month, and overall, National Water had reached 530,000 meter connections, up from 50,000 over a 20-year period. Connection charges is absolutely critical. It makes a difference. Buenos Aires, Argentina, middle-income country, that privatized. They had connection fees of $500 for water. I'm picking up the JS's point about sewerage, but $1,000 for sewerage, which was cost reflective, but nobody could afford to pay it. And so in the end, they set up a $2 a month charge to all customers. So the service connection charge for water and sewerage could be reduced to $120, and that was paid at $4 a month. These are the sorts of automatic things people are doing around the world, just as you are describing very clearly. Some people have tried to escape household connections by doing electronic prepaid meters. Very nice, very well received by customers. They tend to break down rather often. South Africa had this experiment with filling up a 200-litre barrel once a day. Lowest cost, quite a clever way of doing it. An issue we'll come on to in a moment about how you manage consumption. Some people have been trying kiosks as a way of serving the poor. I think many examples in India as well. This one in Sierra Leone, sophisticated point of collection treatment system as well, with prepaid meters. But the challenge in all of this, if you look at it, the cost of a water kiosk and the attendant was actually more than actually giving everybody a household connection. We were getting trapped in old technology, old approaches. We have to move forward. Manila, Philippines, beginning to use meter banks, sometimes put on the boundary of informal settlements. If the municipal council didn't allow slum dwellers to be served directly, they could put these on the outside of the slum area, and then each household would individually put their own flexible pipe connection to their own meter, but more expensive than it needs to be. Somebody was asking in the questions about how do we get pipes into informal slums? And I heard the JS say, pipes are incredibly flexible, going through very small, narrow passageways. It's only when we get to sewerage that people in Buenos Aires, for example, had to start rearranging slum houses in order to get straight runs for sewerage. For water, it is not a problem. And so options for paying, I think we all know these: pay the full costs now, pay the full costs over a period, pay using a small loan through microfinance. For the low income, a specified group, pay only part of the costs with the remainder as above. These are the patterns we see in the world. And for a specified low income group, I believe the connection is simply provided free of charge up to the meter, and even better with a tap already included. The costs not borne directly by customers, partly by being funded by an increased volumetric tariff, or by government or donors increasingly using an output-based aid, payment by results approach, as already mentioned. Only when the connections are in does the money get released. Why are we doing all this? Just to remind us, why am I saying zero connection fees? We have to develop and deliver public health. That is the job of a public water provider. The rich can always get enough water. It is our task to get water to the poorest to protect public health. We can only do that by 100% connections, only by the utility getting on with the task. But yes, only in designated lowest income areas. Middle-income areas, developers doing expensive houses have to pay their full share. But piped water to premises of higher quality reduces diarrhea risk by 75% by one study from Karnataka. That is the goal. Karnataka did well. They put their connection fee in the poorest areas at the cost of providing meters to inculcate the sense of ownership. And then a subsidized consumption rate as well, and simplified procedures. It's a very impressive program in Karnataka, but that's from 10, nearly 15 years ago. Oh, we have to do better, all of us, to move on. And we are doing better. Odisha Watco has it right for below poverty line households, no connection charges. It is happening, it is doing, and even better, Watco has it right, even serving very informal housing, these ones in Puri, and finding a solution when there is no fixed wall to put a meter against. This is impressive, this is good, and it's better than most of what I've seen in the world, even in very simple houses. But I want to bring in this but. As soon as you go to continuous 24/7 water to very low income households, as well as to middle income households, leakage control becomes critical to manage. Leakage of water and of revenue, if we're going to maintain and sustain continuous potable water service. And I would argue that the right to a free connection also comes with responsibilities. Two critical responsibilities, one for the household, who have to learn how to use water wisely and to pay the affordable tariffs, and the service provider responsibility is to enable and support the household to manage the water and bills. And they won't do it without additional support. This is what global experience tells us. To show what happens when you lose control, this is typical frequency distribution profile for per capita consumption in the UK 30 years ago, non-metered, in the days before we had meters. And you see the long tail. And I did a quick analysis of all those people using more water than is the reasonable average. And it comes out, that's right, 26% of customers were using 50% of the water, and therefore that additional bit in the yellow band was approximately 56% leakage over on top of the fair amount. So unless we help customers, low-income customers particularly, manage their leakage, and examples I have seen in Bhubaneswar of where a small business washing cars and motorcycles was being done off a free connection. We have to be able to manage that sort of consumption, having given free connections. And so I came up with what I would call an ideal pro-poor, below the poverty line, house connection. Too many words there, so I put it next to some pictures, most of them from Bhubaneswar to start with. It is a public duty of a service provider to connect every house on the street. It is very valuable connecting every house on the street because it delivers efficiency. It's much cheaper to do it all at one go, put the pipe in, connect everybody. Another study from Argentina, child mortality fell by 24% in the poorest municipalities as a result of the increased household connections. The water meter needs to be on the outside wall, even if it's a non-house wall, for ease of reading and therefore efficiency of monitoring consumption, critical. Interestingly, it's usually recommended to fix water meters horizontally. They stay accurate for longer than if they are vertical. If you get best quality meters, it doesn't seem to matter so much, but medium quality, making them horizontal is the normal way. I've not seen that so often in India. And a tap on the end, and I would recommend low-income house, but where the tap is situated, there is a T connection. So the pipe is ready to go through into the house itself in order to have drink from tap capability inside. The household will decide when it wants to do that. But not only does that give convenience to the customer, and if we're drilling for pipes anyway, it takes 10 seconds to drill through the house wall and make it available, but also that strengthens the whole assembly of pipes, the meter and the tap is more fixed to the outside of the wall because of that T going through internally. It works two ways. This example here, yes, it is on the outside of the compound wall, so it can be read. This example is inside a compound wall. They can't be accessed by meter readers or Jalsatis easily to monitor consumption, and that pipes are very vulnerable to damage, not being fixed to anything. There are now moves to use special containers to put meters inside walls for lower middle income households who have that extra wall. So they can be read from the outside, they are protected, the water comes through the backside inside the house. These sort of ideas could be thought about. Then something I've shared with some of you before from Grenada in the Caribbean. Not only does this have a lockable consumer tap, it also has a lockable meter tap provided by the utility. So disconnection requires just seconds, turning the ball valve and locking it, and reconnection, you open it up again. How to ensure the rights and responsibilities of low-income households are managed. And here is my little picture building up. We have the tap, we have the horizontal meter, we have the lockable meter to enable customers to manage their payments so they don't get into debt and they don't have challenges of full disconnection, which we all want to avoid. And to build into that, something I didn't mention last time we shared these ideas, you can build in a trickle valve. So it's not being fully disconnected, but it's less convenient. And then rather than filling a bucket, a 10-litre bucket in a minute, you might get a cup of drinking water over 10 minutes. Drink from tap remains. No one is ever fully disconnected, but we are managing the process and enabling people to manage their water bill and long-term conservation of water and revenue. Disconnections have been banned in my country, and I sometimes say the utility spends as much time on debt collection now, as it doesn't have this lever, as it does on water supply. That to me is going a bit too far. We can do better than that, I believe, with trickle flow locked meters. A security deposit, Shari has mentioned, that's used quite commonly in India. Here it's being used in San Diego, on this slide, in California. And as well as a security deposit, I recommend that part of the connection process is registering the mobile phone number. I don't know if it's 90% of people in a slum would now have a mobile phone or higher, you can tell me. But with that registration, they can then receive bills and reminders, and they can pay through mobile money, micropayments, to ensure their bill is there. Having paid the security deposit, the utilities now should never be in debt to these customers. They should always be positive, because the process will then be managed so that if they're going close to using up the security deposit, you can then ask the householder to do a micropayment and top it up again. An analog prepaid meter, mobile money, micropayments. And an example from Lusaka in Zambia, receiving in very simple, not a very smartphone, the bill payment, informed about a water supply interruption and where the balance is. So the customer is always understanding what is going on, no charge, of course, for these texts. Customers, low-income customers, need particular support. Odisha doing wonderfully well with the Jalsatis. Now, if a Jalsati was given one of these handheld devices, not necessarily AMR, automatic meter reading, which gets quite expensive, but there's now this system whereby you can have software on a smartphone which will read the meter, take the digits, automatically transfer it to the commercial billing software, and tell the Jalsati immediately what is outstanding on their bill. So in conversation, they can straight away inform the customer where they are doing, and if they are not going to be able to pay their bills, they could temporarily pause the supply, but still with a trickle flow supply, or they can accept the bill, see that it has been paid straight away, and the flow continues. Things to think about. It takes significant hand-holding and global experience in the early stages of Procore connections. And the Jalsatis are a fantastic way of doing it to develop the habit of water conservation and bill payment, and to stop any misuse before it becomes endemic and leads to that long tail of overuse I was sharing earlier. So it's not disconnection and reconnection, it's a pause. The trickle flow is still there. Finally, just to remind ourselves that it is worth doing. Some anecdotal comments from Karnataka from 10 years ago now. This lady was very pleased to have a household connection, had been able to sell her water barrel and having more living space in her 10 square metre home. But on the right-hand side, this household not quite trusting the new supply yet. The barrel was still there. This lady was very pleased to have a household connection and very pleased to have a water bill, in those days printed, perhaps not needing to be printed now, which gave some degree of identification and status. This lady was very pleased to have a household connection, but did not like having to pay. Nobody likes having to pay. But unless revenue comes in at some level so that low-income customers as well value this scarce water resource, it is very difficult to manage it and keep on top of it. And the girl on the right-hand side was just very pleased to have a water tap. Thank you for the time. This was my summation of my ideal Procore BPL house connection. You're most welcome to argue against every point, but the reasons for doing it, I think, are very valid and things we have to think about. Thanks, Chari. Back to you.
Thank you, Richard. We will share this slide, slides, of course, for delegates here, because there are some very, very meaningful lessons for practitioners. Some of the ideas about trickling the flow, put a small gadget to, instead of a disconnection, but lowering the flow. I think these are some very good ideas that are available in India. It's no longer international. These technologies, these solutions are already available. The next event, the leadership seminar that we are going to do, is precisely on those. The practical startup solutions that can be low cost, but very, very high impact solutions that are available in India, made in India, tested in India, and also they can be replicated in India. For example, the gadgets that you mentioned actually are used in Mission Bhagirath in Telangana to reduce the flow, but not disconnect. So I think these are very, very useful ideas. Thank you very much for sharing.